Oh, there's that little live button.
We are live.
Okay, welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm Lucy Steigerwald, and with me I have Sheldon Richman, and we are trying out the, usually, for me at least, faithful Google Hangout. So I'm hoping that works a little better than it does. Okay, the obligatory introduction. He blogs at Free Association. He's with Center for Stateless Society, where he's a trustee and a senior fellow. You can always support his blog, which is a link I can throw up somewhere when this goes up. His work has appeared just about everywhere. The Freeman, The Future of Freedom, Freedom Daily, whatever the hell it's called. And he still pops up regularly at Reason. And I guess he recently moved to California, which is new.
Yeah, that is new. This is my first webinar session here from sunny Southern California.
Southern, no less.
North
Okay.
San Diego County.
That's very southern. I've never been down there. Are you liking it?
Yeah. Can't fault the weather. That's for sure. Beautiful weather. Yep.
That's good. That's something. We've had Memorial Day. We've had lots of stuff about spying. Maybe you tell me where you want to start, and we can get a little conversation going.
Okay. Yeah, it was suggested that we try to cover two things. Memorial Day, because I blog on that every year. I, in my own modest way, tried to rename Memorial Day Revisionist History Day to encourage people to read not the standard versions, the government-sanctioned narratives about the various wars the U.S. has fought in, including up to the current ones. And so every year I put on my blog a list of recommended revisionist readings, which changes over time. I add to it now and then. And also I put in a big plug for a movie I like a lot, my favorite anti-war movie, which is The Americanization of Emily, which is
a good one.
1964 movie. Glad to hear you know it. I'm not surprised that you know it. 1964 movie with big stars: James Garner, Julie Andrews, James Coburn. A lot of big stars. Melvin Douglas. Of course, those names may not mean so much to a younger set, but believe me, they were big stars in their time. And the screenwriter was a very good screenwriter by the name of Paddy Chayefsky. So you have to give him a lot of credit because there's some fantastic mini speeches and lines in there about war, which I think capture so much. And my favorite line in that is, we perpetuate war by exalting its sacrifices. So this always reminds me, of course, I'm always reminded of that line on Memorial Day. Because what's Memorial Day about? It's exalting the sacrifices of war. And the character, the James Garner character, Charlie Madison, the main character, has a great little speech to a woman whose every man in her life has been killed in one war or another. She's a widow. She's lost son, brother, etc., father, and she's saying, someday we'll discover that this war wasn't really necessary. And he says, I don't really care what books generals are going to write, or ministers, meaning ministers of various government departments, or what they're going to write. It's always the most vicious ones who say that war is hell. He says they're not really responsible for wars. We are responsible for the wars because we pay homage to the institution and we exalt the sacrifices. We hold parades, we name streets after the generals, we put up statues of them, and it's just a brilliant piece of writing. And my blog has a link to a clip from the movie that's on YouTube. So I recommend that if people have not seen that, to take a look at it. Also, just go find the movie. It's on Netflix, I think, or one of the other streamings, or you can find a DVD. And you'll want to watch it at least once a year. It's a really great movie. It's also a funny movie. It's got it's not just like a screed. It's not a shrill anti-war message. It's a funny tragic story about D-Day and World War II, set in London for the most part. So it's just a good watchable movie, but it has this great message that it doesn't hit you over the head. It's just enough. to get you saying, yeah, this is a really good movie. So I recommend that. So that's my take on Memorial Day. I think we ought to be, take time during that day, any other day too, of course, and read a little revisionist history on about one of the wars or the current wars.
To me, the amazing thing about that movie is that it still is so subversive.
Yeah.
Plenty of things I love. I don't think that should be a pejorative, but plenty of once bold messages are now kind of quaint. People can't even say the sentiments that are in the war widows, and the people who put up statues are actually doing something. I don't know. It's a really big, really dangerous idea that people just they don't want to go there. I mean,
I agree, and keep in mind it's about World War II, so it's about the Great War, right? The Greatest Generation. Who knocks World War II? He has. I have an excerpt in there. If you don't want to actually watch the clip, you can read the excerpt. Where he says, war is about saving humanity. He says already we've killed about 10 million people. The next war we may have to kill everybody in order to save humanity. I mean, it's so cynical about war. Cynical is the wrong word, really. So honest and candid about war. And then he says, war. The problem with war is it brings out the best in us. It brings out morality and valor. He says, I'm for cowardice. Cowardice will save the world. There wouldn't be wars if we were cowards. And so he says, that's my religion, cowardice. It's just a great little speech. And I mean, stay for the end of the webinar and then go to my blog and watch the clip. Don't do it now, because we'll feel lonely here, just Lucy and me speaking to each other. But then go watch the clip. We probably should have shown it. There was probably some way we could show it here. I don't know how to do that.
I know, that's always beyond my capabilities.
I should have thought ahead.
Wanting to, yeah.
Right. Anyway, that's all I'll say about Memorial Day, unless you or anybody wants to, in the chat window, say anything.
Well, I mean, do we have a chat window?
Oh, I didn't know I was breaking it.
I mean, I don't even know we have viewers. I'm usually in charge of Hangouts, so I'm a little lost because Liberty.me en masse is in charge of it, and I'm not. Oh. Do we have viewers?
Let me see. I'm typing. Is anyone there? Let's see if I get an answer.
It's probably just us. I'm tempted to take that on a. There's a big tangent to go on in terms of Memorial Day appropriate films and stuff. I'm very tempted to go that way, but if you prefer, we can move on to the real world, unfortunately, and.
Sure, we can. I mean, if you want to, we can carry on with the first topic if that's what you want to do, or we can talk about Rand Paul's filibuster of the NSA bulk data collection.
Well,
what do you want to do?
I don't know. Both are good. I already feel like I've been talking about Rand Paul for ages, but I was just talking with my brother at the end. Has been and flirted more with being and sort of pandered to some of the nastier conservatives sometimes. When you realize everybody else who's running, he is still significantly better. Like, I don't want to be optimistic. Mm-hmm. I trust him by any means, but I think you can safely say that he's not as awful. Involved. There's this horrible person on Twitter who I blocked, but he gets people responding, and then I see the conversations. Whose Absando is not aptly named because people writing for it have occasionally been like, "Oh, that's good, Rand Paul," and that makes us horrible, warmongering, sellout, etc., etc. Which I don't think that's true. I don't know.
No. I agree.
The general objection to politicians of all stripes on all principles is one that I think we probably share. But in the world that we unfortunately live in, what do you think about Rand Paul lately?
Well, I think distinctions can be made and ought to be made. I've been critical of him because his message has been so muddled. mean, there are times where I thought he was really on the verge of being the kind of candidate that I wanted to see on foreign policy. But then, he seemed confrontational about Russia and over Ukraine, and I think he supported the airstrikes against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And so I thought it's about the same time that Justin, I think, bailed on him, that he wasn't going to be that person. Now, of course, he did have that filibuster about the drones. That was earlier on, and I was happy that he was doing that. That was a little bit, I thought, muddled, not quite as clear as it could be, but it was, it was something. And then this latest effort where he's vowed to filibuster any bill in the Senate that would just simply reauthorize the bulk data collection or the current language of the Patriot Act of that what is it, 215, Section 215, although that's been struck down by the court, by an appeals court, or not struck down. The program's been struck down as exceeding the language of 215. So the court did not rule in the constitutionality of 215 itself, or even of the bulk data collection program. It simply said there's no authority in the law to do that. That doesn't stop Congress from going ahead and coming up with a new 215 that does satisfy the court. So I'm glad he held his filibuster, although I realize there's dispute over whether it was a true filibuster. I don't quite understand the Senate rules well enough to understand that part of it. But he did delay things, and so far so good, because time is on our side, right? The authorization 215 expires June 1st, right? I guess midnight June 1st. On Saturday, McConnell, who in the Senate, he's now at odds with his own fellow state senator, Paul. McConnell had his own bill, a so-called clean bill, which would let the NSA continue to do what it's doing for 5 years or something, 2 years, 5 years. That couldn't get the votes, so Rand Paul had something to do with that. And then even the House U.S. what's it called, U.S. Freedom Act, which somewhat reformed, and I think in a weak way, not really a big change, reformed the NSA program. That couldn't get 60 votes in the Senate. So far, nothing can get through the Senate, and the clock is running, and on June 1st, that authority ends, and now the Obama administration is in the process of dismantling the program.
Well, so they say.
So,
anyway,
that's
usually moving things down the hall. Yeah. To the other room, next to the NSA room, probably.
Well, yeah, that's right. I can't tell you what's really going on. That's what they say is happening. So far, so good. Now McConnell's going to bring them back next Sunday night? Yeah, which is the night before the expiration. So we'll see what happens, but keeping the fingers crossed.
I mean, I'm not sure what good there is in critiquing, something like that, which, we should acknowledge that there's this spying apparatus that includes the DEA and includes, CIA is doing whatever the hell it does, and the smallness of certain victories, we should acknowledge that and be terribly cynical, but I don't really get this purity of principle that's so pure that you don't even acknowledge that politics exists. It's damned unfortunate that it exists, but it does, No matter how principled we are, it's not actually going to disappear just because of us,
Right. No, I agree with that. I tried to suggest that. I did a piece Friday that was on Reason, I guess on Sunday, about Magna Carta, and then I tried to relate that to current libertarian strategy, thinking about current libertarian strategy, and I actually got into that. I don't claim to have any great insights on strategy. First of all, I don't think there can be a strategy. I think it really is let 1,000 flowers bloom, precisely because we don't know what's going to work. And so that doesn't rule out electoral politics. It may not be my cup of tea, so I may not want to spend my time doing that, but other people don't dislike that activity. And if they're doing it right, then I think they can make certain progress. I mean, people who have been very strong on our side on this NSA business in this current fight are Justin Amash from Michigan in the House, and Thomas Massey from, I think, is he from Kentucky in the House? And those two guys were described as, heirs to the Ron Paul legacy in the House when they were elected. So they've been described that way. Now I haven't watched their record, or I don't know how they voted on everything, but they're both very good on this issue, and that's a great sign.
Mm-hmm.
If they're holding high the banner of civil liberties and condemning the NSA's bulk data collection and the other parts of the Patriot Act, then I want to see those guys prosper. So I'm for a multiplicity of strategies, and that can include backing someone who you find is relatively good, and if Rand Paul would do that, I'll be happy to applaud him. I've just been disappointed in what he's done, except for the couple of examples I already named. So I hope we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I would just say that I think with Rand Paul, it's and he's partially to thank for this. His criminal justice stuff, he's been more anarchist, libertarian, pure, but he's been much more pushing on that, as opposed to the recent waffling and even 180s on some of the war stuff. So I'm always going to say he's good on criminal justice.
Yeah.
And we're not actually. This is what some sort of social anarchist told me when I was a teenager, when I helped them with a counter-recruitment protest in front of a armed forces sort of post, was that you're not signing your name up in blood for the revolution, their revolution, if you help us today. And I try to remember that, and I think the same applies with, gee, Rand Paul did good, done good yesterday. That doesn't mean we think that the system as it exists is legitimate or good. It just means that one day at a time and that sort of thing.
Right. I agree with that.
One concern, though, is with I'm not up on the USA Freedom Act. I know that people like Amash think it codifies some stuff, which is always the danger. They tell you it's reform, and they're actually just spelling out more bad things.
Right.
I think Julian Sanchez at Cato, who tends to be an expert on this sort of thing, actually thinks USA Freedom is a real improvement. But there is that danger that you're actually just sort of granting permission, and you can't trust them, and the wording is sort of always designed so that government people are going to squeeze as much power out of any vague wording possible. So it can get complicated, and I think maybe certain principled people think it is easier to just say, forget it, no politics at all.
Yeah.
And I sympathize with that most of the time. I do.
The civil liberties community, the various organizations, there's been division among them. I think the Electronic Frontier Foundation was in favor of the act, and then as it got amended, I think last week, it pulled its support. Amash, in a statement I saw of his on Facebook, said since it's been amended, he doesn't like it, and he wants to go back to the original version of it. So there's been change. That's a problem with following this. I've had difficulty. There's so many moving parts. You try to write something, and tomorrow it'll be obsolete. So, I did manage to write something. I tried to make it general enough that it couldn't be quickly, dated within a couple of hours. So I can see where there'd be disagreement. Marcy Wheeler, who watches this stuff very closely, she's on Scott Horton's show a lot, and she's got that blog that follows this stuff, Empty Wheel, and she reads all this stuff, which is something I'm not able to do. She finds a few good things in it, but a lot of bad stuff in it too. So I'm not sure where she comes out on net, whether she says it ought to pass or not, but she can find, this provision, is an improvement, this provision is not. So it's really mixed, and that is a reason I think a lot of us throw up our hands when it comes to politics, because it can be so mixed. I mean, a bill can have so many provisions, and one provision in isolation, you may say, well, sure, that's an improvement, except there's 100 others on the other side that you say are backwards moves. So, or if it's 50-50, what do you do? Are you in favor of it or not in favor of it? That's the problem, and I can see why people, like you say, people just throw their hands up and say, I want nothing to do with it.
And we still want nothing to do with it. We just, it's out there.
Right, but we can applaud or withhold our applause from different things, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If they were to strike down the whole Patriot Act, or let these two provisions, I think it's two that are coming up for, or some being sunsetted, If they disappeared, I'll vote. I'll give 3 cheers for the expiration of those two of the 2 provisions. I forget what the second one is actually now. I have to go back and look.
Yeah, the number I'm blanking on too because there's been so much talk of 215 lately.
Yeah, that's good.
No, because the Second Circuit says that basically all of the spying since 2001 that's happened, like with the 215 excuse, it was all bullshit. Which I love how many years it takes for someone to be like, oh, But that almost makes me more worried about a USA Freedom type thing because we finally have someone saying, oh, the Patriot Act was actually not legal, and we don't want, I would be very careful in saying, well, this new thing will be legal.
Right. Well, and all 215 says, it's bad even if the government stuck to the letter of it. It says that the government can demand business records when claiming if it's related to an investigation of terrorism. Business records. So they went to the phone companies and said, we want all the logs of phone calls. Those are your business records, right? So and FISA actually suggested to the administration that they could do this. So they had the blessing of FISA, which of course was a secret court, right? That rarely ever turns down the administration. I think it's turned down a request for warrants a handful of times over all these years. I mean, and it goes back to the late 70s under Jimmy Carter. This was ex-church committee stuff, post-church committee. This is not 9/11. It's supposed to be back before that. It rarely turns down the government. So this interpretation within the administration has held sway, where on the grounds that you could demand business records if it's related to a terrorist investigation, they can say to Verizon and all the others, give us all your logs, the so-called metadata. Give us the logs because, oh yeah, it's related to terrorist investigation. Sure, yeah. If those are the magic words you need to hear, terrorist investigation, then yeah, I will say that, and you give them to us. Well, even James Sensenbrenner, the congressman who claims to have written the Patriot Act or some of it, he said that was never the intention of that section, and the court agreed. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals, just the week before last, agreed and said that's not what Congress authorized. So this program is going way beyond the statute, and therefore it can't continue. Now, of course, that doesn't stop Congress from rewriting the statute. So that's what's up. That's what's going on now.
I love how long it took for them to realize this, and I just no, I was just being annoyed, and I lost my train of thought. Just thinking about the government.
Your love of politics is just exuding all over the screen.
I have some liberal friends who they accuse me of loving politics, and I always have to correct them. I don't think they really don't quite understand the concept of keeping an alarmed eye on it, like a wary eye on politics, what it's up to.
Yeah.
Instead of sort of treating it as like this game with no consequences when it's anything but that.
Well, we can extend this by pointing out that some of the 3 either actual or potential presidential candidates on the Republican side are all in favor of the NSA's program and want it to continue, and that's Marco Rubio. He endorsed it in his foreign policy speech. He said it ought to be done permanently. And then I just read today that Chris Christie and Jeb Bush say it's a good program and ought to continue. So people can line up. We can see, who's where. So far, it looks like only Rand Paul is on the side of killing it. I don't know what Cruz says, if he said anything. If anybody knows out there in TV land, put it in the chat box. And Cruz I don't know where. I don't think Perry is good on it. And also, the government has a report saying it's never led to any thwarting of any terrorist plot or catching any terrorists. So let's put that on the record. The other side will say, oh, this is a vital tool in our fight of, protecting Americans from terrorists. The government's own program says it's never led to any. The government's own study says it never led to anybody getting caught or anything.
I mean, that's how long this takes in government. I'm just constantly amazed by that. It takes 14 years and no successes whatsoever, and this massive spying apparatus, and then finally we start to think, the Second Circuit says, oh, I'm sorry, this wasn't legal. And they all admit it hasn't done anything. And it's just the trillionth example when the bipartisan people say we've got to do something and pass X immediately, and then we'll think about it later. And the consequences of any kind of, you have no idea what they're going to be and how hard it's going to be to get rid of it. And that's one of the many very simple things that I wish that the statists down the block actually understood, is that these things don't go away. They never go away.
Right. And the other thing to say, and I think Christie or Jeb Bush said this, is that nobody's civil liberties have been violated by this bulk collection. Well, first of all, we don't know exactly. I mean, in one sense we don't know, in the other sense we do know. If they're just simply scooping up everybody's data, that is a violation of civil liberties, period. I don't know what they mean. They mean some special violation and somebody's been arrested. But why do we have to wait for an actual individual victim, some egregious case? I mean, why isn't it enough that without a warrant and without probable cause or any of those old principles we claim to honor, they're able to hoover up all the data about who, what numbers we call, what date, how long the call was, all that stuff, which they call metadata, not the content. So they say. They may be lying about that too. I mean, don't forget, Clapper lied that they were doing the metadata. Remember the famous moment in front of
I bet they're lying sometimes.
Well, he out and out lied, and then said, well, it was the least untruthful answer I could give to say no, when I said no, we're not scooping up everybody's data. I mean, the guy committed perjury in Congress in front of the whole country. He still has his job, and why should we believe anything else they say? So, we actually have a question on Memorial Day, so let's jump back to Memorial Day from Scott McRae. Are you seeing the questions, Lucy?
I see it, yeah.
It says, going back to the Memorial Day topic, I engaged with someone about the issue who was very pro-military, and he basically said, with the rise of ISIS, we need a strong military in the Middle East. Thoughts? It's the strong military in the Middle East that gave us ISIS. There'd be no ISIS without the invasion of Iraq, the overthrow of the Saddam Hussein government. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq until that government, Saddam's government, was overthrown. ISIS grows out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So you don't have it. I'm no fan of Saddam Hussein, but he was no fan of Al-Qaeda types. And so he wasn't going to let them run rampant. The Bush administration tried awful hard to get evidence that 9/11 was that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, that Mohammed Atta was trained and the guys were trained in Iraq. He could never do it. They tortured people to say it, and they couldn't get the evidence. And yet they led the American people to believe that was the case. There was this meeting that happened in Prague, which really never happened, between an Iraqi official and Mohammed Atta, was one of the hijackers. So it was a lie. They knew it was a lie. They had zero evidence for it, and yet they wanted the American people to believe it. And Americans, I think, still believe it to a large extent. And it was part of the way they built support for the invasion and occupation of Iraq. There would be no ISIS. There'd also be no ISIS, certainly as widespread, if they hadn't basically declared war on Assad in 2011. The Obama administration, including Hillary Clinton, declared Assad must go. He has and this is in Syria, has lost all legitimacy. Well, once you do that, once the United States does that, that emboldened all the Al-Qaeda types to go now to Syria and take over there, figuring Assad's days are numbered if the U.S. has now said he's got to go. So that drew like a magnet the Mujahideen, the jihadis, whatever we want to call them, Islamists, the Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which then morphed into a more virulent strain we call ISIS. Then Obama and Hillary overthrew Gaddafi with airstrikes in Libya, which opened up huge arms caches, and then with U.S. help, those arms flowed into Syria. thinking, oh, they're going to go to the moderates, right? They're always going to say the CIA is always going to vet the recipients of the weapons, and they're only going to go to the Thomas Jeffersons who are running around there trying to stage a replica of the American Revolution. Well, it doesn't quite work out that way. Obama even once called that idea that there were moderates a fantasy, and Hillary once said in 2011, she said, there's nobody to aid because there's no moderates. And yet the U.S. in effect has done everything to help build up this thing we call ISIS. And now look, in Syria, every time it goes against Assad, it's helping ISIS and the Al-Qaeda affiliate, the Nusra Front, Jabhat al-Nusra. So the idea that we need a strong military to stop ISIS, just misses the whole history of what happened there in the last 4 years.
Well, missing history is the specialty of very pro-military people, honestly. I mean, I end up in this hole, or like this circular thing where they don't believe history. They don't believe that intervention has consequences. Mm-hmm. I don't even know where to begin to speak to these people. I haven't read an article yet. There was something on Vox, which admittedly is very mockable a lot of the time, but conservatives love this. And I saw on Twitter they were making fun of, someone had written on Memorial Day that we needed a holiday devoted to people who try to stop wars. And these people from just, everywhere you'd expect, the Washington Free Beacon, the Weekly Standard, thought this was the, most hysterical concept, the most, Ezra Klein is a hacky, fake academic, and he supported Iraq, and he's very overrated. This was a different author, I believe. It was just the idea that they thought this was such a ridiculous idea. Like, where do you begin with these people? They're so awful. I mean, I don't know. It's just, they don't care, and it's so convenient that Obama left in 2011, because now that it can all be his fault, because he left, and if he had stayed, and who knows, similar horrible things would happen, but he left, and therefore, oh, thank God there's a liberal president to blame this terrible war on, and it would have been fine. All of the dead people up to 2011 were acceptable, but then it can be conveniently blamed on Obama.
Yeah, except they leave out two facts, which you know. Number one, Bush negotiated the status of forces agreement with Iraq, he's the one who agreed that U.S. troops would get out by the end of 2011, and Obama was trying his best to keep 10,000 troops. Except Maliki, the former prime minister, said, well, okay, you could keep them, but if they do anything wrong, they're going to be judged under Iraqi law. And of course, the U.S. doesn't like that, right? They like immunity. They want to judge misconduct by military, not the law of the country they're in. Supposedly a sovereign country, right? But oh no, we're not going to let you judge our guys. And so Maliki said, fine, leave them. So Obama tried. He ended up having to abide by a Bush agreement. I don't know how William Crystal and those guys, they must not be able to sleep very well at night knowing that, but of course they won't let on that they know that, or that that's a fact.
It's I don't know. The dislike of history is... Oh, I've turned off my phone. Excuse me.
That sounds like music to go to a commercial, but we don't have commercials.
Commercial break. This podcast is sponsored by various...
Drink water.
Yeah, that's what I have too.
In California, they're not drinking water. There's a water shortage. Don't tell anyone I'm drinking water.
I won't tell.
Yes, ask questions, folks. Ask questions.
Yeah. But in the meantime, well, I don't know. I think that at the end of the day, we have to spend the rest of our lives repeating the same things over and over again, with some variations, and that's what we need to do, and I just need to accept that. But I like to think the best of people. It's sort of the ironic libertarian thing, is that there are all of these appalling people who don't want freedom for the masses, and many of them don't even quite want, enough freedom for themselves. And you have to, I'm advocating for freedom for all of the horrible neocons, provided they don't have any power over anyone else. They can go sit in their houses and dream their awful dreams. But it makes me more misanthropic than I like to be, to look at these people who think that celebrating not going to war is just could there be anything more funny and like crazy liberal than that? I mean, crazy liberals aren't. They love war too. They just refuse to acknowledge that fact as well.
Well, maybe we ought to get that movement going to have a holiday just to make those people mad. There's been a lot of bad revisionist history in Iraq. I think one great example last week is from what's his name, New York Times columnist who's writing about character these days. David Brooks, about how he was for the war, of course, and said someday history will judge those who showed good judgment about the war, meaning were for the war, and those who showed bad judgment. Now he says, it's true there were mistakes made and bad intelligence, and a lot of people have now rebutted that and said, wait a second, there are plenty of people back then in 2003, 2 and 3 knew that the intelligence was being cooked by Cheney and Bush and these people. McClatchy was reporting about it. There were grave doubts from within the intelligence agencies about this, the Defense Information Agency and others. So don't say everybody thought that and now, if we knew then what we knew now. We knew it then. And so, they're trying to rewrite history now to make themselves look better.
Of course.
The Brookses of the world. But luckily, you can find plenty of stuff on anywar.com which rebuts them, shows they're wrong.
I got really uncharitable towards people who, there was this very particular type of column. Ezra Klein, as previously mentioned, wrote the perfect archetype of, self-flagellation. I was so wrong about that. How could I have been, I'm so sorry. And I'm glad the people who do wake up, even if it takes a fucking decade. Mm-hmm. But it was, and the same with asking all these politicians if they would have gone to Iraq or not. It's still important. I don't want to act the way so many people do, that it's in the far past, but I want them to take the lesson, not just the conceit towards having the necessary knowledge to overthrow a country and put it back together just so that is impossible. I want somebody to say that, and they never will, but they need to.
I agree. Scott McRae has another question, which is a good subject. It would take much more time than we have, but we can get into it. I know this is a complex question, he says, with many different possible answers, but what do you see as the reason the administration's conservative and liberal, he's corrected, conservative and liberal, want war in the Middle East? Or why are they meddling in the Middle East? I think you're right. There are a lot of answers. I think oil is one answer. Not so much that the U.S. needs it. Of course, this policy all began when the U.S. was, using much more Middle East oil than it does today. Today, the oil from the Middle East that the U.S. uses is a small percentage. I forget what it is, but it's a shrinking percentage of what we use because so much is now being produced in the U.S. But even with that being the case, the U.S. still wants to be the dominant power there because we don't want China or Russia or somebody else controlling it. So we have a reason to be to dominate. You know what I mean when I say we. The power elite wants to be the dominant presence, even if the U.S. itself doesn't need to rely on that oil. So that's one reason. You have a concern about Iran being a major player. The U.S. has done a great deal over the years to either have Iran be a very friendly client state like it was under the Shah, or be a pariah. And there's no third position as far as the power elite goes. In 1953, the U.S. government overthrew a democratic government, left of center democratic government in Iran, and restored the power of the Shah, who then ruled for about a quarter of a century. Brutally, secret police, torture, stuff like that. He was very close to the U.S., the Shah. He was very close to Israel. The U.S. and Israel trained his secret police and armed him, helped him start the nuclear power industry that the U.S. now makes such a big deal over. It was begun with U.S. help by the Shah. They don't want an independent Iran being, a major player in the Middle East, which is ridiculous. It's a huge country. As long as the state system exists, right, and until libertarians get their way, but as long as states exist under the Westphalian system, Iran is going to be a player. There's just no, and for the U.S., it's futile and stupid for the U.S. to lumber in there and act like it's going to stop Iran from being a major presence in the Middle East. Come on, get real. It's 3 times the size of population of Iraq. What is it, double the land mass or more? I forget exactly. And we have it surrounded by bases. You've all seen that map, right? About how dare Iran put its country near all of our bases. It's a great map. Go look at that. Where it's surrounded by all kinds of installations and things. And then we act like somehow they're bothering us. I mean, come on. And we have to mention Israel in this context. Israel doesn't want Iran as a rival for U.S. affections. They don't want relations warming up. I think they use Iran, Netanyahu especially, and his party use Iran, but it's true, I think, across the board, use Iran as a distraction from what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. They have no interest in negotiating with the Palestinians or coming to an accommodation. I think they would just like the Palestinians to leave the West Bank and leave Gaza. That would be what they would want. They don't want 2 states. They don't want 1 state. So Iran is a very good distraction, especially for the American people. If you have the American people thinking about what a threat Iran is to Israel, then they're not going to bother with the Palestinians. The fact is Iran is no threat to Israel. Iran's not building nuclear weapons. Read Gareth Porter's book, Manufactured Crisis. That will convince you. The evidence is there. And on the other hand, Israel has up to 400 nuclear weapons, including submarine mounted nukes that are immune from first strike, which means they have a second strike capability. So even if anybody was crazy enough to drop a nuke on on Israel, anybody in Iran, let's say, it would be over that afternoon. So Iran's not suicidal. They're not crazy. The idea of the mad mullahs is just ridiculous. They don't act suicidal. So there are a lot of reasons. Israel's a big one. Oil's a big one. Military-industrial complex. Just the idea that the American elite has always had a chosen people, not to relate this to Israel now, a chosen people complex. If you go back to the very beginning of American history, we, meaning the American people, meaning the leaders, were anointed to bring the new world to, into existence, to fruition. And that first started with the continent, North America, then the full hemisphere. But they were always interested in extending their influence overseas. They wanted to get to the Pacific coast and build a navy so they could extend to Hawaii and China. I mean, they always had their eyes on Asia. I mean, this is not new. This did not start with the Cold War or even World War I or even the Spanish-American War. I mean, go read about the War of 1812. They had empire on their minds from the very start, so this is an old story.
Yeah, alas. But certain people don't mind that. I mean, they don't mind the fact that America always won. They see nothing wrong with empire as long as the right people have one. And lucky, we're the right people, so what does it matter? And so is Israel, of course.
Well, right, because and Israel is seen, they're kind of like us. The Arabs are not like us. The Persians are not like us. But the Israelis, they first of all, a lot of the leaders speak without an accent. Netanyahu grew up in the United States. My cousin went to high school with him in Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. So it's like it's the 51st state. They're really just part of it, and it's convenient, for the U.S. But Israel's not an asset for the United States, as even David Petraeus understood, and he said it before Congress once, and then had to shut up about it and take it back. It's our alliance with Israel that has gotten Americans killed. It was one of the complaints that Bin Laden made in his declaration of war in the late 90s, 1998, I think it was, when he issued his fatwa against the United States. The alliance with the Israelis against the Palestinians was one of the prime bill counts in the Bill of Indictment. And some of the we know for a fact that Atta and some of the hijackers from 9/11 got radicalized by things they saw going on regarding the Palestinians, earlier onslaughts against Gaza, or different things. So it's not aiding the security of the United States. That's for sure. H. Morris says, "Where is the anti-war left?" I don't know that Lucy and I are qualified to say where the anti-war left is. Not around here. Unless you mean the left libertarians.
There's only one left libertarian here. How do you know? Whatever you are is good, no matter how much Corey Massimino tries to troll me about it.
I don't know. Well, the anti-war left. I mean, there are parts that still are active, so let's give them credit. If you look at the people around Consortium News and Counterpunch, I mean, they're going to savage Hillary Clinton. Watch Counterpunch as this campaign goes on. They are going to tear her limb from limb. Now, they support probably Bernie Sanders, who's bad in a lot of ways, but unfortunately, he's not talking about war.
No,
so this is disappointing.
I've noticed that.
He's talking about what? Domestic stuff. The economy. Why do we have 82 choices of deodorant when there are people starving in the world? This is the level of analysis we're getting. You can read about it on Reason Magazine. He's not talking about the NSA. Why are they not talking? Why does the left talk about Citizens United but not the NSA? I don't get that. Such a big distraction, and I think it's actually probably fueled to take our minds off things like the NSA. Anyway, it's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who stuck around, even people like Code Pink, for example, who are criticizable in certain ways, and unfortunately have that certain type of leftist tendency to be a little chummy with bad people in other countries if they happen to stand up against the U.S. and some awful habits like that. But for all of that sort of flaw, which is a very liberal type of flaw, they have there are people like that who have never wavered and have never acted like, well, just killing a couple people with drones is okay. I mean, they know it's not, and that's something, and they should always get points for that. I do think, honestly, that historically, for some mysterious reason, Democrat presidents get a lot nicer of a legacy. War presidents, and especially war Democrat presidents, I don't think there's some grand conspiracy, but I just think it tends to turn out that way. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the initial rather large and also international movement against Iraq, I mean, that was a movement against an imminent ground war, a true invasion of a country, and I think the sort of double-edged, part of the fact that that's gone away is Obama. Part is that just time. The dangerous thing about drones is that they are an improvement. There's less of a body count, and they're this subtle thing giving various Pakistanis psychological trauma. And they can just be there forever. It's the really scary thing about them is that we can, sustain a hideous invasion and occupation for a decade or so, but we tend to get pretty tired. Drones are so cheap and so easy, and they're already in places we're not at war with. So, and they don't provoke the same type of mass. Like this is big, and I don't know why exactly, but that's more things to worry about, I think.
I agree. No, Americans are more concerned when Americans are at risk. And remember, Bush wouldn't let the press show draped, covered coffins coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. Remember, for the longest time, they wouldn't do that. They don't want Americans seeing that. Well, with drones, you don't have that. There's nobody in those things. They're sitting back in Nevada, the guys and women working the consoles like a video game, and so it's it's great from their point of view because it's less expensive because manpower is costly, and the risk to people is very, very low, if not zero.
People who matter, of course.
Yeah, to Americans, right? They don't care if you kill a wedding party and a whole bunch of children, and the government can always say we're investigating this, so others can say, oh, see, maybe they didn't do it, maybe it didn't really happen, maybe it's just people on the ground trying to slander America, and then they go into other things. So right, it's a brilliant, from their point of view, it is a brilliant technology. I hate to say.
Until in a couple of years, when someone who's really bad gets drones and sends them over here, which unfortunately is probably inevitable. The coffin thing, I hadn't thought about that in a long time. I'm just thinking about that's the most sanitized possible, nationalistic possible, showing of a war casualty that I can think of, and they still were terrified of showing it. I mean, a flag on a coffin, no pile of guts, and it's like just a coffin, a shiny coffin and a flag, and then they did the ultimate sacrifice, and they still were afraid to show that. I mean, that shows we're so far from being willing to show and to demand, seeing what war actually looks like.
Right.
So very far. Last year I bought this amazing book from the 30s called War Against War, which is a German pacifist put it together. And the photos in there are of World War I. And as much as you hear about the Western Front and how you try to imagine how heinous it was, it doesn't really feel modern until you look at people with, no face. Armenian genocide photos that look like the Holocaust, and just the nastiest, realist photos. And it's so bad I can barely look at it, but I also think that everybody ought to look at that and get a sense that war is, the gentleman's war. Like, the dead people look the same, all dead people look the same, I guess, is the idea. No matter how shiny the coffin is.
A good person to read on things like this is Paul Fussell. F like Frank, U-S-S-E-L-L. He's written a book about World War I and World War II. I would recommend the one on World War II first, called Wartime. And while he doesn't have pictures, he discusses the attempts to sanitize, the Time Life. What did he say? The Time Life series approach to war. How it's all wonderful and patriotic, and we'll be home by Christmas, and it's almost a sport. In World War I, the British troops would always have a soccer ball with them, and when they got up to rush the trenches of the Germans, they begin by kicking a soccer ball out ahead of them and then go running after it, and of course get mowed down by machine gun fire. Great fun.
Oh my God, so many things about World War I. I wish I could go on a horrible tangent about that. I was so proud.
The final question. I see Lucy's already made an appeal for questions.
Yes, final.
Any more questions?
Going once. Going twice.
I guess we've covered it all.
I guess we have. Well, we should wrap this thing up, I guess.
Well, I'll say to all those who attended, if you're still out there, thanks a lot. And tell your friends and come back. Would it be 2 weeks from tonight? I guess we'll do it again. And do you have any upcoming events to announce, Lucy, or anything like that?
I don't. I have some annoying family things to take care of, so I don't even have anything good to promote. The anti-war, I have a thing from last week. Go look at that all the time. That's always a good time. No podcasts. Should the people remind the people one more time where to read your works, because it's a good thing for them to know.
Okay, well, most of it, I should say, originally appears on my blog, Free Association, which you can get to at sheldonrichman.com. It is all picked up by Reason, so you can find it there, and also occasionally, when it's specifically on war issues, it'll be at Anti-War. I do write about domestic things, which don't get on Anti-War, obviously. But thank you, Scott. So that's the best bet. Would be my blog, but you'll find it other places. I'm also on Facebook, and I always put the links up there. So please look for it.
All right.
Thank you, Lucy. Always a pleasure.
Sounds good. I'm glad this Google Hangout works a little better, I think, than the Spreecast, and this
I
was a
agree.
good. Thinking about horrible things is always a good distraction from things in my life. That's just how I roll. Okay. Well, thank you, Sheldon, for chatting. Thanks, people who asked questions. Thanks, faithful Liberty.me, and we will see you all next time. In the meantime, you smash that. Keep on smashing that state in whatever way you feel is best.
Good night, folks. About the various wars the U.S. has fought in, including up to the current ones, and so every year I put on my blog a list of recommended revisionist readings, which changes over time. I add to it now and then, and also I put in a big plug for a movie I like a lot, my favorite anti-war movie, which is The Americanization of Emily, which
It's
is
a good one.
1964 movie. Glad to hear you know it. I'm not surprised that you know it. 1964 movie with big stars: James Garner, Julie Andrews, and James Coburn. A lot of big stars. Melvin Douglas. Of course, those names may not mean so much to a younger set, but believe me, they were big stars in their time. And the screenwriter was a very good screenwriter by the name of Paddy Chayefsky. So you have to give him a lot of credit because there's some fantastic mini speeches and lines in there about war, which I think capture so much. And my favorite line in that is, we perpetuate war by exalting its sacrifices. So this always reminds me, of course, I'm always reminded of that line on Memorial Day. Because what's Memorial Day about? It's exalting the sacrifices of war. And the character, the James Garner character, Charlie Madison, the main character, has a great little speech to a woman whose every man in her life has been killed in one war or another. She's a widow. She's lost son, brother, etc., father, and she's saying, someday we'll discover that this war wasn't really necessary. And he says, I don't really care what books generals are going to write, or ministers, meaning ministers of various government departments, or what they're going to write. It's always the most vicious ones who say that war is hell. He says they're not really responsible for wars. We are responsible for the wars because we pay homage to the institution and we exalt the sacrifices. We hold parades. We name streets after the general.
Oh, there's that little live button.
We're all live.
Okay. Welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm Lucy Steigerwald, and with me I have Sheldon Richman, and we are trying out the, usually, for me at least, faithful Google Hangout. So I'm hoping that works a little better than it does. Okay. The obligatory introduction. He blogs at Free Association. He's with Center for Stateless Society, where he's a trustee and a senior fellow. You can always support his blog, which is a link I can throw up somewhere when this goes up. His work has appeared just about everywhere: The Freeman, The Future of Freedom, Freedom Daily, whatever the hell it's called. And he still pops up regularly at Reason. And I guess he recently moved to California, which is new.
Yeah, that is new. This is my first webinar session here from sunny Southern California.
Southern, no less.
North
Okay.
San Diego County.
That's very southern. I've never been down there. Are you liking it?
Yeah. Can't fault the weather. That's for sure. Beautiful weather. Yep.
That's good. That's something. We've had Memorial Day. We've had lots of stuff about spying. Maybe you tell me where you want to start, and we can get a little conversation going.
Okay. Yeah, it was suggested that we try to cover two things. Memorial Day, because I blog on that every year. I, in my own modest way, tried to rename Memorial Day Revisionist History Day to encourage people to read not the standard versions, the government-sanctioned narratives of generals. We put up statues of them, and it's just a brilliant piece of writing. And my blog has a link to a clip from the movie that's on YouTube. So I recommend that if people have not seen that, to take a look at it. Also, just go find the movie. It's on Netflix, I think, or one of the other streamings, or you can find the DVD. And you'll want to watch it at least once a year. It's a really great movie. It's also a funny movie. It's got it's not just like a screed. It's not a shrill anti-war message. It's a funny tragic story about D-Day and World War II, set in London for the most part. So it's just a good watchable movie, but it has this great message that it doesn't hit you over the head. It's just enough to get you saying, yeah, this is a really good movie. So I recommend that. So that's my take on Memorial Day. I think we ought to be, take time during that day, any other day too, of course, and read a little revisionist history on about one of the wars or the current wars.
To me, the amazing thing about that movie is that it still is so subversive. Plenty of things I love. I don't think that should be a pejorative, but plenty of once bold messages are now kind of quaint. People can't even say the sentiments that are in the war widows, and the people who put up statues are actually doing something. I don't know. It's a really big, really dangerous idea that people they don't want to go there. I mean,
I agree, and keep in mind it's about World War II. So it's about the Great War, right? The greatest generation. Who knocks World War II? He has. I have an excerpt in there. If you don't want to actually watch the clip, you can read the excerpt. Where he says, war is about saving humanity. He says already we've killed about.
No. Both are good. I already feel like I've been talking about Rand Paul for ages, but I was just talking with my brother at the end of the day, as been and flirted more with being and sort of pandered to some of the nastier conservatives sometimes. When you realize everybody else who's running, he is still significantly better. Like, I don't want to be optimistic. I trust him by any means, but I think you can safely say that he's not as awful as involved. There's this horrible person on Twitter who I blocked, but he gets people responding, and then I see the conversations. Who's Absando is not aptly named because people writing for it have occasionally been like, "Oh, that's good, Rand Paul," and that makes us horrible warmongering sellout, etc., etc. Which I don't think that's true. I don't know.
No. I agree.
The general objection to politicians of all stripes on all principles is one that I think we probably share. But in the world that we unfortunately live in, what do you think about Rand Paul lately?
Well, I think distinctions can be made and ought to be made. I've been critical of him because his message has been so muddled. I mean, there are times where I thought he was really on the verge of being the kind of candidate that I wanted to see on foreign policy. But then, he seemed confrontational about Russia and over Ukraine, and I think he supported the airstrikes against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And so I thought it's about the same time that Justin, I think, bailed on him, that he wasn't going to be that person. 10 million people. The next war, we may have to kill everybody in order to save humanity. I mean, it's so cynical about war. Cynical is the wrong word, really. It's so honest and candid about war. And then he says, war. The problem with war is it brings out the best in us. It brings out morality and valor. He says, I'm for cowardice. Cowardice will save the world. There wouldn't be wars if we were cowards. And so he says, that's my religion, cowardice. It's just a great little speech. And I mean, stay for the end of the webinar and then go to my blog and watch the clip. Don't do it now, because we'll feel lonely here, just Lucy and me speaking to each other. But then go watch the clip. We probably should have shown it. There was probably some way we could show it here. I don't know how to do that.
I know, that's always beyond my capabilities.
I should have thought ahead.
Wanting to, yeah.
Right. Anyway, that's all I'll say about Memorial Day, unless you or anybody wants to, in the chat window, say anything.
Well, I mean, do we have a chat window?
Oh, I didn't know I was breaking
I
it
mean,
to
I
you.
don't even know we have viewers. I'm
Uh,
usually in charge of Hangouts, so I'm a little lost because Liberty.me en masse is in
yeah, we
charge
have
of
a
it,
chat
and I'm
window.
not. Do we have
Uh,
viewers?
let me see. I'm typing. Is anyone there? Let's see if I get an answer.
It's probably just us. I'm tempted to take that on a. There's a big tangent to go on in terms of Memorial Day appropriate films and stuff. I'm very tempted to go that way, but if you prefer, we can move on to the real world, unfortunately. And
Uh, sure, we can. I mean, if you want to, we can carry on with the first topic if that's what you want to do, or we can talk about Rand Paul's filibuster of the NSA bulk data collection.
well,
What do you want to do?
I don't